in Massachusetts, we have, there's many different names for it: vehicular homicide, motor vehicle homicide. That's what it's typically referred to in Massachusetts, is motor vehicle homicide. Right. And then you have two variations of that. It's under Chapter 90, Section 24G. You have a misdemeanor and then a felony statute, right? And I've dealt with both. The problem is, for a defendant, is that they both require minimum jail sentencing, right? Under the misdemeanor statute, it's only 30 days, but once you get into the felony, it's it's 5 years minimum.
Yeah, so let's break that down a little bit in terms of which court do you see them being charged in for each statute, and more importantly, what type of circumstances do you see more often being charged with one statute versus the other?
So more often than not, they're always going to start in district court, right? Although I did have one that was a very high publicity case.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, several years ago, and that there was just a lot of things happening in that case. A long grand jury investigation by the Suffolk County DA's office, and that led to a direct indictment on that charge. But that was a motor vehicle homicide by negligence. There was no OUI associated with that. More often than not, though, you see it charged first in district court, and then if it is the felony statute, it most likely is indicted to superior. I can tell you we've done quite a few of them as clerk magistrates hearings, though, as well, under the misdemeanor statute. And so it's just which boggles my mind, right? Because you're dealing with someone who's deceased as a result of the accident, right? But, oftentimes you see that it's usually the passenger or one of the passengers in the vehicle that's passed away. It's sometimes it's family related. There's a lot of factors that go into it that they make them difficult to deal with.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I know that clerk magistrate hearings got a lot of bad press over time because a lot of people felt that they were private, they weren't fair, and certain preferential treatment was given out. But the truth is, and I've seen a lot of these cases that we're working on together, is that there's never been a motor vehicle homicide that was not issued. It was just a matter of they were going through the normal course to make sure there's probable cause, which is an easy standard for them to reach, and that was issued. And I think when we were talking about earlier to define what a direct indictment versus something that is charged in district court first, it just essentially means they're going to go straight to the grand jury, do the investigation, and then it goes straight into superior court without an individual ever going to district court. But either way, whether it starts in district court and goes to superior court or direct indictment, they still have to go through the grand jury process, which can be a long process. And either way, your client can be waiting for a long time because if a case is going to be indicted, nothing's going to happen in district court. It's just a long waiting game, and it could be a lot of stress involved. It could be your client in custody, which really complicates things and makes it even a longer period of time for them to wait.
I think, yeah, by and large, though, if a person is detained pre-trial, then there's a much stronger emphasis by the court, by the judges, and I will say by the district attorney's office to indict that person quicker. You have a right, if you're in custody, to be brought in every 30 days to answer on a probable cause hearing. So judges are the DA is always going to get a continuance once or twice, right? But once you start hitting that 90-day date, that's when the pressure really gets put on. And when you have a case like that, they usually don't delay that. They're trying to get that up to superior as quickly as they can.
Yeah, and John, tell us a little bit about the aggravating factors. I think it's important to tell, especially during the summertime when people are going around a lot. It's like, just don't leave. Leaving the scene is obviously an aggravating factor.
Right. And absolutely. And that can be the difference because the elements of the crime are virtually the same for both, for the misdemeanor and the felony statute. The difference is that, under the misdemeanor statute, there are, 4 elements that are similar to all of our cases with OUI or driving offenses. And that's that the person operated the motor vehicle, that they did so on a public way. Those are always the first 2 elements. But then, when you have three options on the misdemeanor, either the person was under the influence with a, blood alcohol of 0.08 or greater, or under the influence of drugs, or driving recklessly, or driving negligently. And that was the case that I had. It was a negligent driving one. And then, of course, the fourth element is that as a result, they caused the death of another person.
Right.
So, with that statute, you're looking, that's a minimum 30-day jail sentence there. The massive hit beyond, the mental side of the fact that you killed somebody, is that you're losing your license for 15 years. The difference with the felony portion is that there's no ors. There's no or, negligent, or reckless. It's the same elements, including the OUI portion and the element of negligent driving or reckless driving, right? And so every OUI is negligent. That's they go hand in hand.
Right. Exactly.
But the difference is massive there, because in Superior Court, it's a 5-year minimum mandatory jail sentence. And then the registry, again, it's a 15-year hit, but that's the minimum. It's up to life, so it's at least 15 years on a suspended license there. And again, like we talked about at the outset, just the mental toll for us in a case like that is difficult. Yeah. Those are hard. Those are hard to deal with. Those are hard to kind of wrap your head around, and not something that I really like to deal with. Those are hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually families involved, and you're dealing with not only the person accused of the crime, but also their entire families. And sometimes you have multiple families involved, right? It could be a person's friend that was in the car.
No, it's like I say, in those situations, there's absolutely no winner. No winner. There's nothing you can do in that case to make anyone feel better.
But I would say also, when we're talking about the aggravating factors, those aggravating factors is going to affect sentencing. If you leave the scene, they have to track you down, they have to find you. That's going to affect sentencing.
No, you're right. It's going to affect the police. It's going to affect the initial action, right? I mean, that's how I end up with clerk magistrate's hearing for that. Because somebody stayed and somebody tried to do the right thing, and somebody was, might have been hurt themselves, right? And they have to go to the hospital too. But they're not owed a magistrate's hearing at that point, so that's up to the police. And that's to go back to your initial statement about, people complaining about the magistrate's hearings in the Globe a few years ago. What that story failed to mention is that ultimately it's up to the police. If the police want the charge issued, the clerk is issuing the charge, and
correct.
That's how it's going to go, So ultimately, if they're on board with some alternative resolution to the magistrate's hearing, nobody pushed them into that. That's an agreement between the cop, the DA, the defense attorney, and the clerk, So ultimately, they drive what happens there.
Yeah, and I also want to bring up the very important thing that we were talking about at the beginning, was that the idea of someone can be in custody during the pendency of their case.
Yep.
If the police had to come find you and do an investigation, find out what car it was, or you were trying to hide the car and not be at the scene, or even worse, that the individual was still alive at the scene at the time,
right?
And you could have done something to save that person that you killed,
right?
That now the chances of you being held, because you have shown the inability to follow rules, you have shown the inability to really deal with law enforcement in a proper way. The court,
you've shown no compassion.
No compassion, right? And
right.
You show the inability of, maybe you won't show up, right? I mean, that's the whole idea of bail. It's not to punish someone, but if you weren't there and you ran away from the scene, now a judge may argue that, not a judge argue, but a prosecutor may argue to the judge that he's running away from the scene. He's never going to show up in court, and that's a powerful argument that can be overcome, but it's not an easy one.
No, because you've already shown flight, right? And so that's one of the main check boxes on the judge's reasons for bail is flight risk. And so you can check that, then that's you're there's something's getting hooked on you, right? Whether or not it's there's been issues about whether or not this actually fits into the dangerousness statute, and we've argued successfully before that it does not, but that's not going to stop them from trying to file it in pretrial detention until you can have that hearing and make those arguments. So there's a whole host of issues that come up with this just before you even even read the police report, So, like I said, these are obviously avoidable. And people have to be smart about what they do. and I think the best advice is what you've been kind of hammering throughout this conversation is to do the right thing if you're in that situation, as stay and render aid, and call the police and try to help the person that's hurt.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, with the weather being nicer and all those things, regardless of what happens to your criminal case, regardless if you are held or not, if you kill someone or even injure someone, your life is never going to be the same, right? The next day is not going to be the same from the day before. So make sure you make the right decisions to stay out of those situations, because no one likes dealing with these cases. And it really would ruin a person's life regardless of the result of it.
Right. That's something that's going to stay with you for the rest of your life.
All right, John. Well, thanks for coming on and talk about this heartbreaking case, but very important information to get out there.
Thanks, Jason. Have a good day, my man.